everybody. Welcome back. I'm Susan Lindner, your host of the Innovation Storytellers Show. And I'm really excited for today's guest. And here's why. I don't know if you've ever felt lonely in your role as an innovator, but I know that even in my role as an innovation communication expert, sometimes it's a kind of lonely road. And if we don't have the right networks and support systems, and frankly, fellow colleagues, maybe even competitors, that we can come together in neutral environments, I'll go even far as to say supportive environments, where we can share the tough stuff and also the brilliant breakthroughs or the stuff that we've learned, little hacks along the way that makes our jobs that much easier, then we're behind the eight ball by nature. We're losing out on the collective wisdom of a group. And that's why I'm really excited to have Tommy Knoll on today. And if you don't know Tommy, I hope that you will. Tommy is the founder and head of the Innov8rs CoLab. And if you don't know Innov8rs, it's INOV number 8 RS, Innov8rs CoLab. It's a global working group of senior innovation leaders that Tommy runs. And it is a place where innovation leaders come together to work out some of the biggest challenges that they're experiencing and also to network with people and to share with people who are going through the same stuff you are. Tommy's been an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, and a business owner for more than 25 years and has international experience across multiple industries, ranging from corporate innovation and management and consulting to technology, e-commerce, importing and distribution, and even advanced manufacturing. So Tommy's currently in Colorado, where he lives with his wife and kids, but Innov8rs is this incredible group based out of Amsterdam, but really has expanded networks all over the world. When I think about the folks that I interact with, I think about my US network is really honed and in place with the Institute for Innovation at Large Organizations. You've hearing the last 4 episodes of my work with Peter Temis and our collaborations and his incredible sharing. But when I go to Europe, I think immediately of Innov8rs. I think of it as my European home for like where I find out what's going on in the innovation space on the continent and even beyond. And that's because the founder, Hans Ballmakers, has created these networks that extend all over the world now in conferences, in the CoLab, in lots of other mechanisms. So I wanted to bring Tommy to our community today to share more about what Innov8rs does, what the CoLab does, so you can find friends and sparring partners and other brilliant minds who do what you do wherever you are. So Tommy, thank you so much for joining me. That was a pretty prolonged introduction.
That's great. Thank you, Susan. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And so much of what you said resonates with me personally and professionally, of course, with our community, the Innov8rs community, the CoLab community. And yes, innovation can be a lonely job, right? I think that Innov8rs plays a small role in addressing that loneliness. But yes, there are unique challenges. It's a relatively new function in larger organizations. I mean, according to our research, approximately 30% of the Fortune 500 have some type of a formalized innovation structure or practice or function within the organization. So still a long way to go in terms of socializing innovation in the marketplace. But even within that 30, most of those folks are less mature, right? They're still early on in their journey. So there's a very small percentage, I should say, of large organizations that really have a structured innovation function in place. So a lot more work to do on that front to unleash new value, new ideas, creativity within the corporate environment. And that's, I think, part of our mission.
Yeah. So I first became acquainted with the Innov8rs as a speaker. So it was an amazing opportunity to be able to address the Innov8rs community and talk about innovation storytelling and how we talk about our breakthrough ideas internally inside of large organizations. And Hans was kind enough to invite me back in Paris and New York and LA. And those moments, there has never been a moment at an Innov8rs conference where I wasn't learning from someone sitting next to me, like at the cocktail hour, at the coffee break, or the presenters on stage. I have notebooks filled with what I learned from those events. And so tell us a little bit, maybe you can give us the breakdown, or I'd love to hear it from you, Innovators as an umbrella organization, and then the CoLab specifically.
Sure, absolutely. So, as you alluded to, Innovators, Hans, under his leadership over the past, decade plus, has really brought together a couple distinct groups. We get all types, but there's kind of three primary groups of folks that engage in the broader innovators community. And that's corporate innovators themselves, right? They're in some type of a corporate innovation role. That could be explicitly innovation. It sometimes is R&D or product development or kind of future planning. Sometimes it's corporate venture capital. So those folks are who are true entrepreneurs in an organization. The second group are academics, right? They're researching. They might be a university professor. They might be publishing some of their research, right? So that second group is folks that are really going deep into corporate innovation from an academic perspective. And then the third group are service providers, right? Vendors, software companies, consultants, advisors, and they bring a unique insight, right? They're working with these corporate innovation teams as clients, as vendors to clients. And so they bring a unique perspective to the conversation as well. So our job, Hans's job and our team's job is really to kind of bring all those folks together to share really what's working, what's not working, obviously not working, and meeting other folks, getting support that they need. And so we have a whole platform and programming that we continually put on either in a virtual format or in person as well. So that's an overview of the innovators community, which is global. I think we have folks on most continents, certainly the US and Europe and Asia. And then the Innovators CoLab, which I've been leading for many years, is a private by invitation, no competitors allowed group of chief innovation officers and their teams. And so it's a small group that we've been running since, about 2012, 2013. We've had approximately 80 different corporate innovation teams come through our membership over that period of time. And so what we want to do is it's very much aligned with the innovators community, but we're typically working with folks in more senior roles, right? The chief innovation officer, sometimes it's the CEO, and we've even had board members from publicly traded companies as our members in the past. And so many years ago, this started out as a research project, and we went out to find out what were the corporate innovation practices that were shared amongst the top repeat innovators. And then that turned into a collaboration over time where we were able to backtest those practices to see, does it really hold? Is this facing the market, and can you continuing to be a practice that's used? And so what we do is amongst the CoLab members in a small, private, intimate environment, really share what's working and what isn't working around corporate innovation real time. Obviously, a lot's changed and continues to change, especially in the past few years, right? And so we continue to run this group as a kind of a sidecar to the innovators community. We are still in the process of standing up a group through the innovators community. We've run, probably 6 or 7 different groups since we've started. So that's kind of just a brief description of the broader innovators community, and then the CoLab group that I continue to run today.
Yeah. And what kind of challenges are they bringing you?
Yeah, all sorts. So most of our members are either standing up an innovation function for the first time or are rebooting it, rehabbing it, right? It's not working. It's not working as effectively as they would like it to work, and they want to improve it, right? So most of our members come to us in one of those situations. So if it's the former group where they're standing up an innovation function for the first time, it's really putting the structure in the organization in place, whether that's people or capital or kind of outlining the policies and the structure for it and how innovation is going to function really with inside an organization. And so we have a kind of a programming track, let's say, for those folks, kind of a month by month program that we walk them through. It's not a super structured program, but we have a format that we are able to run them through that over the course of 12 months, gets them to a good spot where they can think, okay, well, we made really good progress in their first year of standing up our innovation function that allows them to build on that. So that's the first group of most of our members. And the second group they're more mature in their innovation journey. They have been running it for 3, 4, 5, 10 years, but they're not happy with the results. It's kind of a time for a refresh or a pivot or an update. And so they want to come to us and say, hey, we've been running this thing for a couple of years. Maybe the practices are not working as effectively and they want to update them. So they come to the group to learn, how they can reboot it and update it. And sometimes that involves a reorg, or sometimes it involves putting new processes or practices or structure or funding in place. And so they come to us and the other members to learn, hey, if we're at this level of maturity or development on our innovation journey, what should we be thinking about? And then it's my job, it's our role at the CoLab to connect them with other members, either within the CoLab or adjacent in the innovators community, who are maybe a couple years ahead of them in rehabilitating their innovation unit. And so we hold formats and programs and working sessions where they can exchange those ideas in a safe environment, where they can let their guard down and say, hey, this is what's really going on. And then ask of their peers, right? How did you go through this? What worked for you? What didn't? So that we can take their own track. So that's a little bit about how the members come into the group and where they are in their journey.
You and I were just talking before we hit record about the average chief innovation officer only lasts about 22 months on the job. And oftentimes that's because that chief innovation officer is under-resourced, right? Is given ridiculous timelines in order to accomplish the stated goals of the organization. Or it suddenly gets lumped in with quarterly results when innovation timelines and innovation processes, right, of trial and error, of failing and learning, are so distorted by what the march to quarterly profits look like. How does Innov8rs help people reconcile that challenging, like, short window you have to either make an impact, or many chief innovation officers also decide to leave that position, whether they've accomplished the goal and then want to pursue something even bigger, or they leave as a result of saying, like, this is untenable. How can we help innovators, and maybe you can tell us how you already do, help innovators with these kind of distorted understandings of what innovation really looks like in the corporate space?
Yeah, that metric, that 22-month metric, aligns with our research as well. We say
I might
that
have gotten it there. I probably took it from y'all.
So when these folks step into these roles, they're on the clock, right? They need to hit the ground running, so to speak. And it's so if you look at another function within an organization, it would be absurd to think that a sales team or a finance team or a marketing team or operations team has 22 months to prove themselves, or they're going to be cut or defunded or something else where they're not as effective, right? It would be a little strange to think that way, but that is the case with innovation. We liken it to marketing, right? Where you have a down quarter, marketing gets cut, you're back up, you get your marketing budget back, right? I think that's a very simplistic way to look at it. So I think the theme here is that innovators, entrepreneurs they're on the clock, especially when they are in these two scenarios that I just mentioned of starting a function for the first time or rehabilitating, right? Once they hit reset or start, they need to hit the ground running. And so we've set up our membership, at least in the CoLab, recognizing that they are on the clock, right? They probably have realistically 24 months to prove themselves and to be reelected. What we say, like, you're going to get reelected, you get another couple of years in office. And so for our program within the CoLab, at least, we've designed our quarterly work structures and our work plans to make sure that over the course of at least a 12-month period, they're able to deliver those moose heads, right? And at the very beginning, those moose heads might seem as valuable. They might not be as significant, but there are ways to put up some moose heads in the early days to say, hey, we are delivering, even though we're not fully set up yet, because corporate innovation typically is working in those longer time horizons, or they should be, right? In an ideal scenario, they are creating the future of the organization, right? And creating the future takes time. And so it's when that conflict, when innovation is, and it inevitably happens that innovation is tasked with delivering, right? Like, show us where your work is showing up this quarter. Where did your work show up this quarter, right? And so there's a pass, let's say a whole pass for a certain period of time where that question is on the back burner. It's not as important. And so we set up our structures so that when working with CoLab members, we help them solve a big innovation challenge over the course of a 12-month period. And so we always set that challenge up so that if it does get solved, or implemented within that 12-month period, they're unlocking some significant value, right? And so that's how we address this being on the clock, this time pressure of doing it. And then when our members join for multiple years, we'll reset so that initial 12-month challenge builds into the next year.
I think it's hysterical. You use these analogies around moose heads, right? As a New Yorker, I'm trying to think what the equivalent of like putting a moose head on the wall really means in terms of those milestones that you're hitting. I think that's hysterical. We don't have a lot of hunting culture unless you're just trying to get through the subway, but
yeah, it's like, how can you walk into the boardroom and put that moose head on the wall we love to use these analogies, but I say, walk into the boardroom and put that moose head on the wall and they can't ignore it. Like, what is that one thing that you could put in the boardroom where it's like, it's going to be for 5 or 10 years and it's really important. So yeah, that's the analogy we use.
Yeah, something you can really hang your hat on.
Mm-hmm.
Or your shotgun, apparently.
Exactly.
So yeah, and coming up with actually realistic milestones for the board, right? Because some of the best innovators that we've had on the show, they talk about innovation in terms of an investment portfolio. They have those kind of incremental innovation. They have things that are kind of taking a swipe, maybe entering new markets or going deeper into a kind of technology. And then there's always a bit of money reserved for a moonshot that could completely alter the course of the company entirely. But last time I was at Corning Glass, I also heard the chief innovation officer there talking about how he kept a little bit of a rainy day fund. So even for those projects that had been attempted in the past, but hadn't really come to fruition yet. So maybe it hadn't met the right market space, or maybe it hadn't found the right niche or the right iteration of the technology, or maybe the messaging was off. Always keeping a little bit of a slush fund in order to keep the lights burning on a great idea that hasn't yet found its home. I'm curious how, with the programs that you run at CoLab and just even that time frame that you were talking about, how you help people structure and communicate those ideas back to the board. Like, how do we actually tell them and get it really to sink in that this is the alignment around the strategy?
Yeah, I think you had pointed out earlier where we use these analogies, right? And so there is some deeper thinking behind these analogies. That's not just for the sake of being kind of cute and cliche. It really does help because innovation is this still nebulous function, right? If you ask 100 people what innovation is, you're most likely going to receive 100 different interpretations, right? Just like with trust. Hey, I trust you. Oh, I trust. Well, what does that mean? Like, you're going to ask people what trust is, you're going to get a wide range of interpretations. And so whenever you have that wide range of interpretation, it can be trouble or conflict, right? Or you're moving away from clarity, and that just doesn't work in a corporate environment. And so what we do in this particular case, and you touched on it, is absolutely encourage our members to frame their innovation practice or function as a portfolio, right? So what does that do? Well, you can go to a CFO and request capital using innovation portfolio best practices. So we borrow from portfolio management within the corporate innovation environment as well. And then if you structure your narrative, your pitch, your offer, right, your presentation around an innovation portfolio, then the CFO can attach to those words and understand, okay, well, this is what you're talking about. So not only are we able then to relate to CEOs, CFOs, folks making decisions at the board level and the C-suite around innovation investments. I'm going to kind of highlight that word investments for a second. So not only does that allow you to communicate in a, let's say, more professional manner with that group, but what it also does, let's say implicitly, is get you away from a budgeting conversation. We kind of alluded to this earlier, where the innovation leaders at some point going to be beholden to those quarterly results. We want to get the innovation team away from those quarterly results, right? At some point, it's going to be applicable, and it does come into play. But what happens in that particular case, if our members, if a corporate innovator, an intrapreneur is funding their efforts out of a budget, let's say, that can be cut or is vulnerable to changes in the marketplace or stock prices or revenue, then their budget is inherently threatened as well. Whereas taking an investment approach, you're typically looking at a longer time horizon. Well, we're going to invest into innovation and we're going to expect a result in 5 to 8 to 10 years. So it's patient capital, right? And so if we're in that environment or that framework, that philosophy for approaching innovation through a portfolio investment strategy, it moves into longer time horizons, gets you away from the threat of the budget, and allows you to speak to and communicate not only with your board, but also outside investors about the importance of investing into innovation. So I know there's kind of a lot going on there, but just framing the conversation around the investment does a lot of different things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think everyone on this in listening to this is very familiar with agile and lean and creating these kinds of sprints and the idea of creating real value quickly to an organization. How do we get that mindset shift that, like we were just talking about, to this portfolio mindset? What are the stories that you think chief innovation officers and folks who have an innovation mandate in their job description, what kinds of stories do we need to be telling? And how important do you think that facet of the conversation is, the actual innovation communications inside the organization?
Top one or top three most important components of an innovation function is being able to communicate your ideas, anything around corporate innovation. It's incredibly important. And so there's a couple different things, and I'll try to keep it brief, but defining innovation is incredibly important, right? It's really important. Getting back to that trust conversation. So there is a method to setting up an innovation definition along a spectrum that can then lead into portfolio management. So that's one place. And when we're working with our members on designing their definitions, right? What is your definition of incremental innovation? What is your definition for a minor or a major innovation? What is your definition of radical or breakthrough innovation, right? Along that spectrum from incremental all the way through to radical, right? And everything in between. And what we do with our members is say, point to examples from the organization's history that can showcase or display an incremental innovation in the past. So you have some type of a framework to show as an example, hey, we've done this before, right? We might not have called it an incremental innovation, but it was. We added a new color or new packaging or however they defined it. So reach back into their history and give us examples so that people know, what that is. And so then you can identify that moving forward as well, especially when you are in those agile or brainstorming or those idea development sessions when you're coming up with new concepts. You go, well, that goes in this bucket. That should maybe go in the incremental innovation bucket, or this is moonshot. This is way far away from the core. This is radical. And so that's what we do is encourage our members, because most of these members have some history, right? They've been around for a while and they can reach back and provide those examples. And if they don't have those examples from their own history, it's like, well, go out into the marketplace and find an example that might map to your organization in terms of being that type of an innovation, of incremental, radical, major, minor, whatever, and kind of use that as a benchmark. If you don't have it yet, borrow maybe an example. So that's what we do, is we encourage our members to do those. And then also on the flip side of that, reciprocally, point to examples of things that aren't those examples. This is not a minor innovation, right? This is not that. So it's as important to identify from the history of what it is to also say this is what it is. So if you put it in the incremental bucket, you're clearly saying this is not moonshot, this is not radical. And so that you can then, as these new ideas and concepts new concepts start to be introduced, they can be categorized, let's say, more rapidly and more efficiently. And then they get the resources and get on the right track, let's say, into whatever business unit or development cycle that idea or concept or product or service needs.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing, sometimes we think about this lofty idea around innovation, right? And I know somebody commented last week on one of the podcast posts that, like, isn't innovation just a buzzword that every company has to have in their mission statement or in their core values to just be successful today, even if it's only lip service? How do we combat this innovation theater that we see so often? FYI, if your company's getting a new pool table, cappuccino machine, and bean bags, right? It's chances are you have to dig a little deeper to find out whether or not true innovation is going on. But how do we combat some of the innovation theater that's going on when we really want to be doing the heavy lifting around innovation and prove that it actually matters?
So I'm gonna like maybe a different perspective than I think most people have around innovation theater.
Mm.
Because innovation theater, right, which is, let's say, inauthentic public relations or thinly veiled innovation efforts. Like we can talk about what innovation theater is, but for the sake of this conversation, let's say it's not entirely authentic and real. Like there's not really anything there. It can be incredibly useful, innovation theater, if it's deployed properly and useful. And I did write an article about this recently about innovation theater. You have to be very careful with it. Customers, clients, right, vendors, uh, if they're sophisticated and paying attention, they can sniff that out and go, that you're not being authentic, you're not being real, or that's not matching what's going on in the organization. So you have to be very careful about that. But in terms of innovation theater, I think it honestly should be embraced. I think it's a practice that can be embraced. You have to know what you're doing, right? You can't just walk into it and, to use an extreme, you can't just go lie, right? You can't just make up stories that aren't real, like they have to be there. But telling your narrative, I mean, more than most about storytelling and the importance of storytelling and how to craft that narrative and how to make it connect and how to make it meaningful. Like it really is an important component. So a theater production might not be real, but that doesn't mean it can't be enjoyable and authentic, right?
Mm.
And so that's what we encourage our members to do, is to take their own tack around presenting. Like, what is theater? Well, there's a stage and there's actors and there's supporting actors and there's a narrative and there's a plot and all that stuff. So embrace it, use it, find your perspective around how you can tell your story, right? Make it interesting, and let's say seduce the market or seduce folks that need to be seduced into your organization so they can show up and say, hey, well, what's really going on here? So that may or may not be contradictory or controversial, but we think that innovation theater can play an important role if done properly.
Yeah, if there's actually innovation to back it up, as opposed to having this place called the studio or the lab,
Yes.
and yet no real innovation is getting done next to the cappuccino machine, right? Sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I just had a conversation with a gentleman on the innovators community. We do a program where we have these themes. And so we actually had a whole conversation around the demise of the innovation lab in the last
Mm.
couple of years.
Hmm.
So what happens is, if you don't do the innovation theater well, or innovation in general, you're going to get cut, right? And there's a trend. Walmart just cut their lab.
Oh,
There's a Google cut there's a lot of labs that are getting cut right now, especially the corporate innovation labs. One of our members, in each one of our annual kickoffs at the beginning of each year, we always have a moment of silence for those folks who are no longer in the room because of things like that have happened, right? They couldn't get it together and they got cut, they got downsized, right? So that's the ultimate, like that's what can happen if you're not doing it properly. So yes, and why would you go through all that of setting up a lab and hiring people and putting out the press releases and telling your customers, and then 18 months later or whenever you're going to cut this? So do it right so it's sustainable.
absolutely. So the other thing I'm just thinking about is the global sphere. I think one of the things I love most about innovators is just tying. There is no company that has an innovation function that isn't operating globally, and trying to innovate across cultures, across time zones, across market requirements is so challenging. It's one of the times where I just feel so grateful to have studied anthropology in working in this field. But what do you think are some of the greatest challenges as people find success with their innovation and then try to take that around the world?
It's a common conversation amongst the CoLab. And in fact, we're working with a couple members right now where I can think of at least two of our members right now that are pivoting from one geography to a global geography,
Mm.
right? And there are a lot of there's a lot of friction within that, right? Many of which you just had mentioned. And I'll just add to it, cultural barriers and differences is a really important one. And so I don't know if I have a unique solution or unique perspective on this, other than just to have that global perspective and understand this is what our platform and what innovators more broadly in CoLab we can provide is insight into what is going on in those environments. And I can just provide kind of example here, and that is right within Europe and the US. These are, and I've worked in Europe since 2000, since 1999. I've had European kind of business partnerships for a couple of decades, and obviously this continues today. But the approach and the approach to corporate innovation in Europe versus the US is pretty different, right? And I've looked at this pretty closely, and one thing that I see is that in Europe, for instance, they have a longer time perspective, right? These countries have been around for a long time. These cultures, let's say, right? Because that's what companies are cultures and mirrors of their cultures and their environment. Whereas, let's say in the United States, we just don't have that history, right? So they have a different appreciation for history than maybe the United States, and it's just not as long, right? It's just different, right? America has been incredibly innovative, still the largest economy in the world. Incredible inventions have come out of the United States. And so I think in sharing those different perspectives, there can be valuable knowledge or practices that happen in the US that don't happen in Europe and vice versa. And so that's our job, to kind of bring people together to share what they are, and borrow from what's working, what's not working, and say, hey, I can insert that in my structure, and let's experiment with this, and vice versa. The Europeans can say, well, let's fund things a little bit differently, or experiment with things a little bit differently. And so I think that constant knowledge sharing and practice sharing can be incredibly helpful. And we've seen it, right? These corporates are borrowing from business units in Europe into the United States, and back and forth.
And I think spreading the culture of innovation is no easy task either. It's one thing to cross cultures, it's another thing to actually make innovation feel like it lives outside of the boardroom. There's that dreaded HR question. I wrote a blog post about it this week about, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how innovative is our culture? Or how innovative is our company? And every chief innovation officer is like crossing their fingers, like, does anyone even know what I'm doing over here?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes even spreading the innovation ethos throughout the company and making people feel that they have access to it, that as an employee, they feel a part of it. Are those also parts of the CoLab that you talk about, kind of spreading the gospel of innovation through the organization? It's not enough for it to sit at the C-suite. In fact, it's one of those reasons why people leave after 22 months.
Yes, yes, and yes. So I'll just give you an example from our research and kind of where it is today. I had mentioned that this project started with a research initiative to understand what are the practices utilized by corporate innovation team and those repeat innovators. And of course, culture was in that, right? And so our perspective years ago is that culture was a derivative of everything that came before. Culture is a derivative of setting up definitions and socializing them, setting up the metrics and the outcome and the performance expectations for the innovation function. What is the financing, right? What is the capital structures that are used? How do we fuel, not only from a capital perspective, but also a human perspective on setting up these teams, the processes, right? Belief systems, right? So our original interpretation was that culture was a derivative of all of those things, right? It was what is left over. It's the outcome of putting all those things in place. And so one of my close colleagues wrote a book on this. He wrote the book on the culture of innovation within organizations, and he in fact was an advisor of ours for many years and still is today. And he said, "No, Tom, you have it all wrong. You engineer a culture of innovation from the beginning. You design it intentionally, and then all the other things that you're talking about, that I'm talking about, the metrics, the definitions, the finance, come from that. You design it." And so
Incentives, right? As
all of it,
part of your
everything.
job description. Yeah.
So that was one example of where we had these practices before. We're continuing to backtest these in the marketplace. And one of them is really getting completely overturned. Like my thinking has changed, and our thinking has changed radically on that. We still go back and forth and say, oh, maybe it's something in between. And so we just offer up those anecdotes, those stories to say, hey, here are a couple different approaches for culture. Every organization is different in terms of how they approach culture, right? How it's instilled, what does it look like? What are the values? All those things. And so anyway, those are just kind of two perspectives that we take about culture, but it is incredibly important. It is up, let's say, as it's in the conversation now, this culture of innovation. How do we do it? And it's still very much, let's say, an open file, an open question on what is the best approach to creating a culture of innovation. I certainly don't have the answer, but it is something that's talked about quite a bit.
Yeah. Right. And we can read Steve Jobs and books about him and right. And how Apple does it and Facebook does it and all the other kind of folks that we think about as the stalwarts of innovation, but maybe stalwart of innovation is not something to aspire to. Right? It should be something that's constantly flexing and changing. Well, Tommy, I conclude each of our conversations with 3 hot seat questions. So I'll ask you, what is the greatest innovation of all time?
The internet.
A popular one on this show for sure.
Is that right?
Any of us could live without it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's significant. It's absolutely significant. And I was just trying to kind of go back over time. We look at these industrial revolutions. We're obviously talking about the fourth industrial revolution. If we go back and look at the other industrial revolutions, right? Agriculture, steam power, coal and fossil fuels, fueling the industrial revolution. Obviously, the technology revolution.
Vaccines.
Yeah. So I think at least in terms of looking back at what's at the most, those are the bit. So the internet would compete with all of those, I think. But I think that the longer term, the internet is going to continue to have a profound effect. And I'm not saying anything that anybody listening to this probably doesn't already know.
If you had the chance to join an innovation team, any innovation team through the course of human history, which team would you have wanted to join?
That's tough. I certainly admire Steve Jobs and what he's done there and his approach. I think that some of those folks you mentioned might be, dare I say, dictatorial in how they created their cultures, but I think that he was incredibly brilliant. So I'd say my short answer is to be, right there with Elon Musk. I think that what he has done is it's just incredible across all his enterprises, and how he continues to approach innovation, first principles, the value of learning, the value of failure, right? Resilience. There's so many amazing things across Tesla and SpaceX, and even some of his early ventures, right? PayPal and X, the original X, that were just, he's just been an incredible innovator, and I'm just in awe at what he continues to do.
Yeah. So my last question, what's one thing you wish someone would invent for the good of humanity, or something that just absolutely drives you crazy that you just wish someone would fix?
I think the global culture right now is massively off. I think that however you want to look at it, divisiveness, polarization, however you want to look at it on so many different levels. Just look at the front page today. I'm sure you can find 5 or 10 themes of strife and what's going on in the world. So let my guard down a little bit. I'm a lover, not a fighter, I should say. I like to collaborate. I like it when people get along. I think that there's far more human value in collaboration than there is, and there has ever been, versus conflict. So if everybody can just get along, that would be one thing that I would love to fix.
Right. And the structural defects that go along with holding those not getting along things in place. Yes. Amen. Amen. Tommy Knoll, thank you for being on the show today. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
They can go to innovators.inov8, the number 8rs.co. That's one place. I'm on LinkedIn, and certainly welcome conversations.
And you're having a conference coming up shortly too, right?
We are. We have our US conference where we're hosting one annually in the US each year. And so we'll be in Southern Cal at the Alliance for Southern Cal Innovation at the beginning of April. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's in, 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness. Get to work. We'll let you get back to it, Tommy. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. And shout out to all my friends at Innov8rs. Have a phenomenal conference. Thank you.
Excellent. Susan, thank you. Great conversation. Really appreciate it.